Hello, my name is Denise Lindeman, and I'm one of the members here at Desert Grace. I'm excited to share this Sunday message with you. Would you take a moment right now to subscribe to our channel? And if you like this video, be sure to give us a thumbs up so that we know you've been blessed. You can do those things below.
We find ourselves kind of in an interesting place today and having ended church revolution, but what is the next thing to go on to? And there's a passage of scripture which if you looked it over, you probably said, oh, I know this one. It's so familiar. In fact, it's essentially the mission statement for the general church of the Nazarene. And yet at the same time, it becomes this incredibly challenging passage because of the fact that it is so familiar. In a way, what it happens, I think, sometimes is that familiarity gets us to the point where we don't always seem to understand what's really being called. We get to those passages and go, oh, I get it. I know it. And so as I get started this morning, a couple things I want to say. One is that I hope my clicker works today. Last week it was just a debacle, and if you didn't know, we've added a lot of new equipment for live streaming, and as we have added more equipment, I don't know what happened last week. We'd added a new piece, and then all of a sudden we had lost the clicker, and so now we've added something new, and it was road tested this week, so it should be fun. But the second thing I want to say is that it's sort of hard for me to preach. In part because I really wanted to go a couple of hours and you wouldn't hang out that long. But the second thing being that it is a very challenging passage when you really stop and think about it. And I'm worried that sometimes we don't stop and think about it. But to get started off, let me talk about something that's really obvious. Uh-oh, it's not working already. Researchers suggest that a person is more likely to believe information when it is presented to you as negative information. I know that comes as a shock if you've ever watched the news. I know that it comes as a shock, but it's this study that was done, and basically they would ask people a number of different questions, and some of the information was just presented opposite ways, and those who participated had the opportunity to rate on a basis of 1 to 7 how believable or not believable this particular statement would be. And amazingly, people are more likely to believe it if it is given in a negative sense. It's an interesting phenomenon. Here's an example. When civil litigation cases go to trial, 60% of plaintiffs lose, winning no money and often having to pay attorney's fees. People will rate that as very highly believable. Now, it doesn't matter if it's true or not. It is, generally speaking, but it doesn't necessarily matter how believable is it. Our psychology is that we're looking for something specific, and when you present it as a negative, people are more likely to believe it. So here's a statement that was not rated nearly as highly as believable. When civil litigation cases go to trial, 40% of plaintiffs succeed and win money. That statement was not as believable as the one I just gave you, which is 60% of plaintiffs lose. And now you caught that, right? I just gave you the exact same information in two different ways, and yet when they've done the study, and this was an actual question, people rated the other one, the negative one, as more believable. How about this one? It's not on the screen, so would you be more likely to believe that 99% of people will not be injured by peanuts? Or are you more likely to believe that 1% could likely die from eating peanuts? Most people go with the second. It's the same information. This is really something that catches on with the internet news cycle. Now, we've sort of switched over to social media instead of, do you remember the email chains that used to be sent around? You remember those? Thankfully, they're not out there anymore, but before Facebook and Twitter and all of that, people would actually clog up your email inbox with craziness. When you get those, it's almost always some crazy thing that you have to watch out for. It's always this incredibly fearful, hey, this is what's going on, and you know what? We believe it. We don't even question it. How about this one? Do you believe that carjackers will occasionally put like a $20 bill on the car somewhere so that you get out to go get the bill and then they jump in your car and take off? It's one that still goes around today, by the way. Here's what Snopes and some others say about that. Carjackers are not going to take the time to hang out and wait for you to come out of the store so that they can then take your car. That there's not any evidence that that's something you need to even concern yourself over. Yet it has been passed around for years. How about that whole thing where if there's somebody driving in gang territory, somebody driving with their lights off, you flash your lights at them, then they're going to kill you? It's gang initiation. You believe that one? If you say no, good, because it never happened. But people pass it around and believe it. And because it's negative, right? It's a hazard, and so you're going to be more careful. The thing is that the theory that the researchers sort of have come up with is that negative information actually provokes a physical response. It initiates our fight or flight response, so that if I tell you that 40% of plaintiffs will win, that you go, oh, that's nice. But if I tell you that 60% of plaintiffs will lose, now all of a sudden you're like, well, I better be careful before I sue somebody. I know you were all sitting there thinking about who you'd sue. But it's that fight or flight response. If I tell you that there's absolutely no danger at flashing your lights at somebody who they have their headlights off because they're not a gang person looking for someone to kill, you might not really pay attention to me because you've already heard that if that happens, ooh, be careful. They could be looking to kill somebody. I think sometimes this is what happens when we become so divided anytime there's a controversial topic. Things like, what color should the carpet be in the sanctuary? Things like, I hate to mix religion and politics, but politics. And incidentally, if you didn't know this, some of the people in this room believe one way, and some people in this room believe another way. It's true. We are not all the same. But why? When we begin to get concerned that we may lose what we desperately want or that we think is not going to do the best for it, we then kick in that fight or flight. So negative information is always great. I think that's why political campaigns almost always go negative. Because it's better than saying, well, look how wonderful of a person I am. It's easier to say, look how bad the other guy is. And that's just, anyway. 2020 hasn't exactly been a positive year, if you didn't notice yet. I had great hopes. Coronavirus hit. And if you haven't seen anything that can divide people quicker than coronavirus, your head can spin. I mean, you look at, all these professional things, and this is that, and this is that, and they can't even agree on whether this medicine is good or this medicine is bad simply because this guy says it's good and this guy says he's not so sure. And the study here says this, but maybe that's skewed, and the study here says this, but maybe that's skewed. What do you do? We don't necessarily, people getting beat up in the stores because, did you have a mask or did you not have a mask? I don't know why we get divided over some of these things. I think fear is part of it. We just about started to get to where that was all okay and something new happened. I don't think we were over the first one yet when the new thing happened. Protests and riots. And then, if you didn't notice, it is an election year still. You would hope that maybe the campaigning rhetoric will be turned down a little bit because of everything else that's important, but I think actually they've done the opposite. We have all these divisions, and negative is what we tend to look for. And I've come to the conclusion that this year, any one of these things that has happened would be enough to make you want to stay indoors and shut the TV off and block everything out, regardless of what the government says. Stay at home, curfew, forget it. Just cocoon yourself, right? I think that's where we fail. Here's a problem that I see. In the midst of all of this, we as Christ followers sometimes begin to struggle because we believe the negative. And so my question for us this morning is, how can a Christian live out the Great Commission even when they have doubts about whatever? How is it that we can continue to stand up and say, look, God is still there. And regardless of how divisive even He is, we still have a responsibility to do what Jesus called us to do, which is to keep all of the information and teaching that He gave to ourselves unless somebody comes and asks and then says, would you share it with me? No? No, it's to go and make disciples. Not to let people who want to be disciples come to you. This is a difficult thing, isn't it? I want you to think about Jesus' initial disciples. He recruits each and every one of them, right? He sees fishermen and he says, hey, come, follow me and be a fisher of men. And they, for whatever reason, say, absolutely, I'm on my way. Let me just leave everything here. And so that's one thing that they've been through, and that would quite uproot your life if you didn't already know that. It would make a big difference. So not only are they recruited by Jesus, they then spend the next 3 years doing ministry with Jesus. And now I want you to think 3 years of your life and Jesus sort of giving you these stories, these parables, these teachings that so often are mysterious. So often so that they end up sort of going behind when everybody has left saying, hey, Jesus, what'd that mean? Explain it to us. And if you've read through the scriptures, sometimes He explains it and you're still like, I don't know. But 3 years, they are together, eating. They're going to bed probably in the same general camp. They're traveling together. They're always in a boat. They're always walking along. There's always all these other people. All the stresses of that, right? That they would be facing. And then all of a sudden, even though Jesus said, hey, this is what's going to happen, they watch Him die. I want you to think about that in terms of what we're facing today. That sometimes we hit our stride and we say, all right, Jesus, remember what we were getting ready for when COVID hit? That thing called Easter? This is going to be the year. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to reach out to the community. We're going to make a difference for you. And then it was like, oh, nope. All the air was sucked out. Everything was taken care of. We get to Matthew. In chapter 28, Jesus has died. They've been through this horrible thing. And then, the very beginning of it, there is an empty tomb, which is wonderful news. It's awesome news. The women have actually seen Jesus. There's a whole nother sermon to be had in there, but that's a whole nother story anyway. The guards who had been standing outside, as Matthew recounts it in chapter 28, the guards outside are worried that they're going to get in trouble, so they kind of make up a rumor. And negative information, by the way, in case you didn't notice. It's negative because they say that Jesus' disciples came at night and took the body away. And it's more likely to be believed because it's negative. I'm curious, if you're one of the disciples and you haven't seen Jesus yet, what's going in your mind? We get to Matthew chapter 28, verse 16. We're going to read through 20. That'll take us all the way to the end of Matthew. Then the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. Then Jesus came to them and said, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always, to the very end of the age." It's good stuff. It's good stuff. It's sort of an abrupt ending, but it's good stuff. The narrative of the commission begins with this incredibly painful reminder of the recent events. Because it starts off with the 11 disciples. I want you to think about that for a minute. Because is there any greater reminder than that? I watched a video, I don't remember, several years ago, I guess now. There was the world's tallest water slide was built in I think, Kansas City, Kansas, in that area. And I guess the slide was part of a TV show and the engineering and construction of it. And one of the state senators for that state, it was State Senator Day or State House Day or whatever. He took his family, and there were 6 people in his family. And one of the little boys got on that ride, and the ride took off and left the ground and decapitated him. And in the video, you can see the pain even years later when that state senator says 6 went to the park, only 5 returned. 6 went and only 5 came back. Imagine the pain when Matthew is saying the 11 disciples. We know what happened to Judas. It doesn't take much to remember, but if your heart doesn't sort of hurt at the moment that you see the 11, knowing that Judas is out of the picture, it ought to. And then you realize that 11 means that Peter's still in the game. You remember what happened to Peter, right? He denied Jesus. 11, we're missing 1. But the rest are there. They end up in Galilee, as Matthew writes it. He actually says this 3 times. There's 3 different times they're told to go to Galilee. The first one is chapter 26, and this is before Jesus dies. And he says, look, once he raises from the dead, he'll meet them in Galilee. It's simple enough, right? And then in 28:7, just before this, in the empty tomb, there's an angel there, and he says, look, go tell his disciples to get on over to Galilee. He's going ahead. He's going to meet them there. And then Jesus sees the women. He comes to them as they travel, and he says, go tell my disciples, meet me in Galilee. This is important, right? Galilee is special, and I know you all know why already. But just in case you've forgotten, Jesus' ministry began in Galilee. And so it is now going to end in Galilee. Matthew tells us that they were on the mountain where Jesus told them to go. Interesting thing is that Matthew never names the mountains, and he is kind of known for that. It's so much so that some scholars kind of say, well, maybe Matthew is talking more metaphorically, that sort of like when we go to a retreat or something, it's almost always up on the mountain where we meet God, or even if we're not up on the mountain, we have what we call a mountaintop experience where we're so close to God, and then we come back to reality. I don't know if I necessarily think that's right. I think Matthew's kind of like, who cares? Who cares what mountain? It's not important. Upon seeing Jesus, the disciples worshiped and doubted. You notice how there are no names named in there? He doesn't say, well, these few were really good about worshiping. Right away, they just were all in. Some of them were waiting. They wanted some proof. Show us your hands or show us your feet. And none of that is even discussed. It leads us to wonder, and there's some ambiguity in the Greek. So there's a couple of different questions we could ask. Did some of them worship and some of them doubt? Were there some that immediately fell to their knees and said, Jesus, you're alive, everything that you had taught us is true, and yet there were some that went, I don't know what to make of this. Did all of them worship? Did all of them worship, but some of them were going, I hope I'm doing the right thing because that dude was dead a few days ago. That's my translation. Or did all worship and did all have doubts? The Greek could actually be read in all three of those ways. It's not that clear. And by the way, if Matthew wanted to really discuss it, he could have. He could have written. But here's the thing. They recognize Jesus, and worship signifies belief. You don't worship that which you don't believe in. It's kind of an interesting thought, isn't it? He doesn't tell us exactly how the worship went. He doesn't tell us exactly what the belief is about, but there's enough faith that worship becomes their very first thing. And if you didn't know this already, worship is the appropriate response to Jesus. It was then, it is today. When you see Jesus in your life, you should. Does that mean just at church? No. Does that mean that sometimes you might have to worship at work? Yes. Does that mean sometimes you might have to worship when you're not expecting it? Yes. Okay. I'm going to test you later. I'm going to ask you when you saw Jesus active in your life and worshiped him in that moment. Because that's what we ought to be doing. The belief is that Jesus did rise from the grave, just like he said he was going to do. And now we see him walking. That's a good reason to believe, don't you think? And yet there were some doubts. There was doubt that sort of feels like it's not compatible with worship. The way it's worded, it makes me uncomfortable. I don't know about you. But when I start to think, wait a minute, worship seems like, okay, it's belief, it's settled, it's done. Doubts feel sort of incompatible. They don't belong in the midst of worship. You don't come to church and feel God's presence in this place and then leave going, I wonder if God is real. Or I wonder if God really will do what he said he will do. You don't do that. You are usually one way or the other. How is it possible that there was both worship and doubt? Especially if we're talking about all the disciples, and I'll let you in on a little secret. I think all of the disciples worshiped, and that all of the disciples had some doubts. I just think that's reality. Doubt is described as hesitation, indecision, and uncertainty. Well, let me ask you this. If you saw someone die, you saw them put into a grave, you know the next morning that a couple women that you trust say that they have seen Jesus. And you have the rumor that's going all over town that the disciples stole the body. Now, I've already given you a little hint into the psyche of people. Which information are we more likely to believe? It's not that we don't trust the women. It's just that what they're saying sounds crazy. In a way, it is crazy. And so it makes total sense to me that in light of the fact that, yes, I'm seeing Jesus, but again, that dude was dead 3 days ago. And the rumors are swirling. I might find myself with a little bit of hesitation. I'm probably still going to worship, but I'm probably going to be one of those people that's like, how? How'd this happen? What? Help, right? Remember Peter walking on water? When he steps out off the boat and he's walking along, you remember that moment? And then all of a sudden, he begins to sink. And Jesus uses a few simple words. Why did you doubt? Same word that we see here. And now Peter, who suddenly begins to doubt that he's walking on water, which is hesitation, indecision, right? Uncertainty. I don't know about you, but if I found myself suddenly walking on water, there would probably be a moment when I'd be like, this is not real. I might want to stop and pinch myself, which according to the story is when I would fall into the water. So doubt is part of faith in a very real way. If Matthew had simply said, look, Peter got it, and so did Matthew, and so did Mark, and so did so-and-so, but here are the ones that didn't. And here's why. It's kind of what we wish we could see here, right? Because then it would make it all really clear. It would be so understandable to us. I'm wondering if maybe one of the biggest things is that so much happened in such a short period of time that just about the time they started to recover from one event, and before they even had a chance to recover, something new occurred. Betrayal. Death. Rumors. He's right in front of us. Would that be enough to freak most of us out? I think so. It is for me. We're having a hard enough time going, okay, guess what? There's still a pandemic in the world, but there's also riots, and there's also a lot of division in our country and in our world. The doubt was not about whether this was Jesus. That seems like that's the whole bottom line. If there was worship and some doubt. And then again, I have to wonder, that's Jesus, but is it? That's Jesus. And yet there's something about seeing someone who you have spent 3 years with, who you've given your life to, where there can be no mistake. I don't know how to take all that. The first disciples, and by the way, every one of us who follow the first disciples will struggle with the tension of faith and doubt. If you have never had a doubt about Jesus Christ and whether or not he's really God, and whether or not he does what he says he's going to do or will do what he promised, you are in the very, very, very tiny, minuscule, well, you're probably one of the people that lies to yourself. Now, I'm not talking about a big major doubt like shakes your faith. I'm talking about maybe even just a fleeting moment. And you can probably say those come from the devil. They don't come from God. I'm with you on a certain amount of that. But there is, in the midst of all of this, a struggle where you have belief, but you also have questions. Doubt in the sense of uncertainty. Doubt in the sense of some indecision or hesitation. If God told you right now to empty out your bank account and write that money to a particular cause, are you not going to hesitate? The name is Clint, C-L-I-N-T, A-U-G. You follow what I'm saying. I wonder if sometimes this is our biggest problem. And part of our problem is that we sometimes present Jesus that if you just have enough faith, you can move the mountain, and then when the mountain doesn't move for us, we go, whoa. I want to make sure you get this. Every single disciple of Jesus Christ is going to be less than perfect in their faith and belief. Despite that, when Jesus gives the Great Commission, he doesn't stop and go, well, the 5 or 6 or 10 of you really believe, but you don't get it, or you few don't get it. He doesn't say that, look, if you're doubting me right now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride. Maybe you'll get over it someday and you can come along too. He gives the commission to those who have complete faith and those who have doubts. And I'm going to stick with my theory here that all of them had doubts. And then if we're really honest with ourselves, all of us sometimes struggle with a little doubt. Belief about Jesus' identity, doubts about what you might be experiencing, those might be the norm. But when we come to church, we're convinced that we must put a really united, strong front. Doubt? No, not me. Never. I can get real personal here. I'm not going to. The reality is that if Jesus is telling you to do something and you don't do it, you must have a doubt. Notice that in this passage, Jesus doesn't say, shame on you for having doubts. Did you catch that? I've been around Christians who sometimes say, oh, you're doubting? Whoa, why would you doubt? Jesus brings comfort to the disciples. He expresses his authority, he gives the commission, and he promises his presence. So in other words, here's what I kind of want you to see. In the midst of their struggling, in the midst of everything else that was going on, Jesus looks into them and says, I know that you're having a hard time understanding what's happening right now. And here is my comfort to you. First off, I have all the authority under heaven and on the earth. I have all the authority. Second off, here's what I want you to do. Go make disciples, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teach them to obey my commands. And in case you think, oh, good, he has the authority, he's given me a job, I'm hired, he says, I'm going to be with you. And not just till the end of training, or maybe till the end of training, but till the end of the age, which, in case you didn't know, is forever until he comes back. I don't know about you, but there's something about having the authority of God on my side. Think about this. He says, I have all authority, and basically I'm giving it to you to go do these things. Do we really live into that? I better hurry, I'm going to run out of time. Well, Jesus spoke of his authority in previous parts of this. You got to understand that the resurrection event probably pretty much says, yes, he's got the authority. There's no doubt he's coming from God. He's everything he said he was. We talked a little bit about this, but I want to go a little bit deeper into it. There are 3 actions that are part of the Great Commission. The first one is that you must make disciples. And really, if you want to get specific, it says go and make disciples, but there's a little bit something we got to talk about that. This isn't just a call to foreign missions. That Jesus is saying, all right, you must now travel to other nations and become missionaries because that's the authority that I'm giving you. What he's saying is I'm giving you the authority not just to go to Israel, which was the very center of God's activity, but to go throughout all the world. To do it anywhere you may go. In fact, what he's essentially saying is that Israel's special role, Israel had this great thing, they were God's nation, ends with Jesus because that was the end of Israel's importance. Their role as the what this looks like to live with God. And now Jesus is saying, Everywhere, everybody needs to hear the words. So Israel now, kind of shockingly, if you're a Jew at this time, is just another nation. That's kind of scary to them, I'm sure, and kind of concerning. There's a lot more I could say about that. I'll stop. Maybe instead of saying, go and make disciples, they would be better worded to say, when you go. Not that you need to go somewhere like, hey, get on an airplane right now, head over to Africa and start teaching there. But wherever you are in your journey, make disciples. Now, I don't know about you. It sure seems easier to do the first thing, because then I can say, well, I'm not called to foreign missions. Can I write a check? Pay for somebody else to do it for me? But guess what? Jesus says, that's not what I'm telling you. Wherever you go, when you get there, make disciples. Where are you going for lunch today? Is it at home? Make disciples. Are you going to stop at Jack in the Box on the way? Pick up some food? Make some disciples. Are you going to spend some time with a neighbor? Or just, wave to them when you see them out on the driveway? Make disciples. For those of you that love to golf, when you go golfing, what do? If you're one of my kids, one of the children that's here in the room, where you go and you're playing with your friends, what are you supposed to do? Did I get the point across? Going is assumed. A disciple is a student. Students require nurture. This is not just one time. Jesus came, he died for you. All right, here's your ticket to heaven. See ya, we did a good job here. Now think about what Jesus did. He nurtured his disciples. How long? And I'm thinking that they were probably sort of annoying sometimes. He probably, sometimes when it says he went to get away, sometimes I wonder if that was code that the disciples were really being annoying. Three years you should spend. Do you get what I'm saying? I don't mean it literally. But wherever you go, you're supposed to make disciples and make sure they're nurtured. Make sure they're nurtured. The student becomes a student of righteousness because they will now be hearing what Jesus says about righteousness. We all have our own idea of what makes a good person, and Jesus has the gold standard. He's the one who makes the rule. All right? That's the thing. The second thing he tells us to do is to baptize. He's really specific here. He says first they must believe in Jesus. Then they must go through the baptism class. They need to buy a particular robe. And then when all of that is done, make sure you have a certified person to do the baptism. Just worried some of you weren't paying attention. Did you catch it? He just says baptize them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Bring them into the community. Make them part of it. Hey, this is the one place in the Bible where this particular phrasing appears, and it's where we get how we baptize people even to today. It's so important that we understand. He says, just go out and baptize. Just baptize people. Make sure they're from the right nation. From one of the all nations. You caught that. Third, teach commands. Aren't you so excited? You're all teachers. Every one of you. You are going to go, wherever you go, you are going to make disciples when you get there. You're going to baptize the people. Now, you might have to arrange that part. I'm not sure that Jack in the Box would appreciate you saying, hey, can you just give me a cup of water? I'm going to baptize you right now. But you're going to then teach. You want to get that person, that disciple involved, and it's your responsibility. Do you catch this? Somebody should be discipling you. You should be discipling somebody else. And Matthew gives us this great handbook. You remember Matthew kind of starts out and ministry gets going, and one of the very first things is the thing we call Sermon on the Mount, where he says quite frequently things like, "You have heard it said, but I tell you." This is what righteousness really looks like. The disciples are supposed to be following Jesus by doing what he did. They're supposed to teach. What does it look like to really be in the kingdom of heaven? What does it look like to really do it? And I can teach you facts all day long if you walk out the door and you say, well, that was nice, but don't obey what Jesus told you to do. Not what I told you to do, but what Jesus told you to do. You've missed the point. So I know that you have all learned that wherever you go, you are to make disciples. I can't make you make disciples, but you should be obedient to what Jesus is asking you to do. I mean, I could teach facts about Jesus. I can pick something that I think is important. I can do all these things. But in the end, if we're not living like Jesus lived, if we're not teaching like Jesus taught, and the words that he's saying and the ideas that he's giving, we aren't doing our job here. It's important that we get that. I'm going to keep going because I'm running out of time. The final words of Jesus are a promise of presence. Promise of presence. Some of you know I don't really like to be in social situations by myself. One of the hardest things for me to do is greet people in church that haven't been here before. That's one thing that COVID-19 has done a wonderful job. It feels so much more relaxed. No visitors coming. They're all online. I don't have to worry about going up and saying hi. I kid a little bit. But the reality is that it makes a difference for me if somebody is standing right next to me. When I'm not alone. And Jesus says, wherever you go, you make disciples. And by the way, you're going to baptize them and you are going to teach them. And I'm right by your side. Not only do I have the authority, but I'm here with you. And not only do I have the authority, but since I'm here with you, not only do you have the responsibility to do this, but it's going to be successful. Why? Because it's not you. It's not you. How can a Christian live out the Great Commission even with doubts? Even with doubts. I think the commission is lived out in heavenly authority rather than earthly feeling. I think if we really want to be honest, when we get to this idea of what does it mean for us to live out this commission, I know you all can parrot back exactly what I say when I say, hey, wherever you go, you should... You almost had me scared there for a second. But just knowing that, my guess is that you will walk out of here and you will find yourself in a position where you have the opportunity to talk to somebody about Jesus Christ, and you are not going to feel like it's a good thing to do. Something is going to try to stop you. And I don't think you can live out the commission unless you are living it out on what God has told you, which he has given you the authority to go and talk. And by the way, in a world where people don't want to hear necessarily. And doubts are a function of how we feel. They're normal. I would even say they're typical. If you don't sometimes have a doubt about what God is calling you to do, you're better than I am. I guess that's all I got to say about that. But having the authority of God on your side should overcome the feeling. I've had people who sometimes say, I'll volunteer to go out and see about getting some donations from, say, Jack in the Box and Denny's for like a children's event. And they always ask for the same thing, a letter of authorization on church letterhead so that when they walk in and speak to the manager, they feel like they have the authority to do so. And some of that, of course, is that the manager wants to know that the person has the authority. They're not just in there trying to get some free lunch. But the reality is that when you walk in with that letter and you've already decided what you're going to do, you can walk in with incredible confidence because you have the authority of the entire church behind you to do the very little mission that you just were asked to do. Now, I just gave you a very big mission that Jesus gave us. And guess what? You have the letter. It's called a Bible. You have the letter. You have the authority. And Jesus is with you. You got to get a little more excited about this, or I'm going to preach longer. You see, these aren't our ideas. They're God's idea. Scholars kind of get to this point where Matthew talks about baptizing people, and they say, Matthew doesn't talk about baptism very often in his gospel. And then all of a sudden, Jesus says it's really important. Kind of an interesting dichotomy there. You and I might be imperfect, doubts and all, but yet God chooses us to carry on his work. That's pretty cool stuff, I just got to tell you. Does a lack of authority or an overwhelming feeling best describe your situation in this moment? Because you have the authority. You may also have the feeling. I don't want to dismiss it. But we have to make the authority the bigger piece. Replace your feelings of inadequacy. Replace your feelings that you don't have the authority. Replace whatever it is that you don't feel like you have with God's authority. That's what you need to do. The commission is lived out in experience rather than just mere fact. I've never heard anybody say they have come to know Jesus Christ like this. Yes, last week I came to know Jesus Christ. It was the best day of my life. Since then, I've been reading the Bible, and I've been getting new insights into the world and how Jesus wants us to live. Anytime I meet a new Christian, they are bouncing off the walls, walking like 6 feet off the ground. Oh my gosh, I lived this life over here, and then all of a sudden I met Jesus, and now, and I read the Bible, and every time it's like, whoa! It's not facts. Hate to tell you that. It's not facts, it's experience. It's how we live our lives. Doubts are the result of an experience that brings the fact into question. Does God love you? Have you ever had an experience where you wondered? The reality is that lots of us have experienced rejection. Lots of us have experienced other situations. Lots of us sometimes have wondered, if this is the way people treat me, how could God love somebody like me? Is that a doubt? Hey, you ever been in a line that's really long and it moves really fast? The facts are that there are the most people in front of you, but the line is moving very quickly, so it doesn't feel that way. Or have you ever gotten into the shortest line you can find at the grocery store, and then you find out it's because the person in front of you, can't figure out the pin pad or something? I remember I think it was a Visa commercial, but it was one of those where everybody's going through really fast, and then the grocery line, and then all of a sudden somebody stops and writes a check. When facts, I got in the shortest line, your experience starts to call that into question. It's the same way in some of the ways we interact with people. The disciples have experienced all of this incredible thing. They have incredible sorrow, incredible turmoil, incredible personal, and by the way, as a community, failure. The experience probably doesn't lead to what they're actually discovering. God still says, I choose you. God still keeps it. If you only consider the facts about Jesus, you will miss the entire experience with him. Does your experience with Jesus impact your ability to live out the Great Commission? Authority, experience, The commission is lived out in presence rather than in solitude. You ever been around the people that say, I work best alone? That might be true for some things, not for the Great Commission. You work best with God on your side. And doubt is acceptable. Hesitation, uncertainty, indecision is perfectly okay. Why? Because Jesus is with you. What's your job? To be obedient. Obedient. Think about it this way. Any amount of faith that you have is enough. Think about it for a minute. I think sometimes we envision faith as though it's like a thermometer, and that you have to get to a certain temperature before you finally have enough. Jesus says, hey, believe in me and we're good. That's enough. Put your faith in me. Perfect faith is not the absence of any doubt. It's a perfect belief in Jesus Christ that he is who he says he is. And that you can trust your eternity to him. That's what it's really all about. Perhaps the Great Commission is only great because it helps us to have faith and doubt coexisting, living together in a perfect sort of harmony. I hate to tell you this, the Christians that scare me the most are the ones that have everything all figured out. And if I've never told you before, I don't. Every so often, God shows me something I'd never seen before. And if I get completely convinced that I've got him figured out, there's a problem there. I think biggest probably challenge we have is that we tend to believe the negative. We're in a world right now where all the news, by the way, if you're spending a lot of time watching the news, shut it off. I try to limit myself to a very limited amount every day. Because otherwise, whoa, the sky is falling and God is no longer in control. So watch a little tiny bit and then pray the rest of the time. See what that does. We tend to believe the negative. And we're good at believing the negative. We're good at believing the negative about us. We're good at believing the negative about others. We're good at believing the negative about the faith, whether we have enough or not enough. You see where the problem lies? God's got it. He has the authority. He gave you the authority. He's given you a little job to do. And then he said, by the way, I'm going to be with you while you do it. Amen. Doubts, faith, it's all good. Do you have doubts and faith? Do you have faith and doubts? Do you have just one or the other? Heavenly Father, we thank you so much. Thank you so much that you are a God who doesn't mind that we occasionally have doubts. Sometimes we're hesitant. Sometimes we're kind of stuck in indecision. Sometimes we're not 100% certain. But help us to be firm on the fact that we know that you are God. I don't think that there's a mandatory requirement that we ever question that. But I think other times, Lord, we're not exactly sure what we think. Help us to embrace those doubts. Help us to look at doubts and know that you are the one who overcomes all. Help us to really be concentrated on everything that you are and on the commission that you've given us. Lord, we're about to go. We're going to leave this building, and when we do, your word just said that when we go, we need to make disciples. Help us to live into that. Help us to be that kind of people, that kind of person, and that kind of church. And Lord, as we leave this place this morning, protect us, keep us safe, till we have the opportunity to worship you once again. In your name we pray. All God's people said.
Thanks for watching this sermon with me. If you enjoyed your time with us, we'd invite you to join us in person for a service. Visit us at desertgrace.org or give us a call at 928-305-1132 for more information.